Robin Vincent. It's been almost 2 years since Hamas's attack on Israel, and each day, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is getting worse. The latest concern is starvation. Yesterday, the United Nations said that the entire population of over 2 million people in Gaza is severely food insecure. 1 out of every 3 people has not eaten for days. And 80% of all reported deaths by starvation are children. The number of people attacked trying to get food in Gaza continues to grow. Since May, NPR reports that over 1,000 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli air forces when trying to get food, often near aid sites run by an American contractor. Now, Israel, for its part, has slightly changed its tack. This past weekend, the country announced daily humanitarian pauses in its military operations. And that's meant to allow food and supplies into devastated areas. The UN called this move progress, but the agency said it doesn't answer the call for a ceasefire. At this point, over 57,000 civilians and combatants have been killed in Gaza. That's according to the Gaza Health Ministry. There are still Israeli and non-Israeli captives being held by Hamas. One word to describe this horror is genocide. For a long time, a Jewish Israeli expert on the term was adverse to using the word to describe what's happening against Palestinians. But recently, he's come to understand that's exactly what's happening. He recently wrote about this in the New York Times. To discuss that now, we have Omir Bartov here. He's a professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Brown University. Professor Bartov, welcome to the Metro.
Thanks for having me.
So before getting into the conversation, I want to highlight something important for our listeners. While the war in Gaza is far away from Metro Detroit, it touches a lot of people here. Many Arab Americans have been watching violence erupt across the region, and it brings back painful memories of the wars that forced them to leave their homes and come to the U.S. in the first place. You can't drive through Dearborn without seeing Palestinian flags. And many Jewish people have a deep religious and personal connection to Israel. You can't walk through Oak Park without seeing Israeli flags. President Donald Trump was elected in Michigan in part because of former President Biden's aversion to holding Israel accountable. So this conflict, the tension, the drama, the fear, the sadness, the anger, it touches a lot of our neighbors, our backyards. It's signage that rests on people's literal homes. Now, with that, Professor, I want to talk to you because you study genocide. And we know this word is loaded and it means a lot to people. So we have to be really careful when we deploy it. What constitutes genocide?
So let me just start by saying that I actually was in your neighborhood just on the eve of the elections. And I heard people speaking quite clearly that they would have trouble voting for then President Biden because of what was happening in Gaza and the reluctance of that administration to put a halt to it. And I just want to correct you on one thing. Although the New York Times article just came out last week, I actually wrote an article last August in The Guardian in which I said that I had reached the conclusion that what Israel was carrying out in Gaza was genocide. So I came to that conclusion in May of 2024. And I can explain why. But genocide is a particular, different people have different ideas about what genocide is, and often people will use the term, since it's available, as an expression of outrage when they see something terrible happening. But the only definition of genocide that matters in international law is a definition by the UN Convention of 1948. That's the one that matters. It's not whether it looks like the Holocaust, or it's not if we see something that horrifies us. And that definition is that genocide is acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a particular group, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group, as such. That's the definition. So what it has to do with is the intent to destroy a group. And you can destroy it by killing members of the group. You can destroy it by imposing measures intended to prevent birth within the group. You can destroy it by removing children of the group. And you can destroy it by deliberately inflicting on that group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. So while it is necessary to show that there is indeed a significant amount of killing, the point is that people are being killed or subjected to conditions that are not conducive to their existence, that this is happening to them as members of a group. And that the intent, which is important to show, is the intent to destroy the group as a group, whether by killing it or by other means.
Thank you for that, Professor. And before we get into the details of what led you to call what's happening in Gaza a genocide, you've mentioned that this has to align with the UN Convention of 1948. Is that the body then or organization that gets the final say when some conflict has become genocide?
So, with the creation of the United Nations in 1945, an international court of justice was established, known as the ICJ.
Right.
And the ICJ is the court that can determine whether a particular state is engaged in genocide or not. And as you may know, last year, at the end of last year, South Africa filed a claim against Israel at the ICJ, claiming that Israel was carrying out genocide. Now, the ICJ may take a year or 2 or 3 to deliberate that. If it were to reach that conclusion, the enforcement arm of that International Court of Justice is the Security Council. And the Security Council of the United Nations can then enforce sanctions or other actions against a state. It has to be remembered, however, that all signatories of the Genocide Convention, and that's most states around the world, including the United States and the State of Israel, by signing that convention, pledge themselves to act to prevent genocide before it happens, to act to stop it when it is happening, and to act to bring to justice those who carried it out later on. That's an obligation by the signatories, and they cannot obviously wait for the ICJ to rule, because the ICJ may rule long after the genocide is over.
Professor, is it true as well that the International Court of Justice, the amount of that it doesn't necessarily then have teeth? Because what I'm thinking about is the fact that it has issued that Benjamin Netanyahu has committed war crimes, and that leaders in the U.S. have not taken that seriously.
Right. So that's not the International Court of Justice. That's
Okay.
the International Criminal Court. And the International Criminal Court, which was recommended by the Genocide Convention in 1948, was created only 40 years later. It's based on the Rome Statute. That court does not deal with states, but with individuals. And that court has issued arrest warrants for both Benjamin Netanyahu as Prime Minister and for the former Minister of Defense, Gallant, not on accusations of genocide in their own indictment, but rather for war crimes and crimes against humanity, including murder. And we can talk about why, but that means that all signatory states, and here the United States and Israel have decided not to participate in the International Criminal Court, but all states that are signatories of that, if someone like Netanyahu were to go there, they're obliged to arrest him and to bring him to The Hague for a trial. So if he travels to France or Germany or Britain, hypothetically, he would be arrested and taken to The Hague, where the International Criminal Court is placed, facing the International Court of Justice.
How important is the U.S.'s role in all of this? I guess what I'm wondering about, and again, we are about to get into what exactly is happening in Gaza, but the one last question I have for you on this topic of enforcement and declaration is what it's actually, you see that a genocide is happening in Gaza, but what is it actually going to take for something to change, and how important is it for the U.S.'s involvement in acknowledging what you see as a genocide?
Well, first of all, the United States is the main facilitator of what is happening in Gaza. The United States provides 80%, between 70 and 80% of all the munitions and arms going to Israel come from the United States. All these 2,000-pound bombs and the airplanes that carry them, and the interceptor rockets that Israel uses, all of those come from the United States. Secondly, the United States provides Israel with the diplomatic Iron Dome. That is, as we said, if anything comes up in the Security Council, let's say member states call to have a ceasefire. The U.S. is a permanent member, one of 5 permanent members of the Security Council. It has veto power. And it has used this veto power over and over again to stop any enforcement of decisions by the UN or proposals by the Security Council. So in that sense, the US is crucial to facilitating what is happening and will be crucial to stopping it.
Thank you for that clarification. This is the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. Our guest is Omir Bartov. He's a Jewish-Israeli professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Brown University. He recently wrote in the New York Times and previously in The Guardian that genocide is in fact happening in Gaza. Professor Bartov, let's turn to what's going on in Gaza exactly. Soon after the war began between Israel and Hamas, you didn't think genocide was a fair term to use. Why?
So I wrote about this originally also in an op-ed in the New York Times in early November 2023. And what I wrote there was that there was already evidence of war crimes, and we can say what's the difference, and potentially crimes against humanity, but I still did not see sufficient evidence to say that it was genocide. There had been statements by Israeli political and military leaders, people with executive authority, in the immediate aftermath of the massacre by Hamas, which itself was, of course, a war crime and a crime against humanity, statements that indicated or could be interpreted as having genocidal content, that is, demonstrating genocidal intent, which is crucial to proving genocide. But it was not clear at that point that this was more than just statements made in the heat of the moment. So at the time, I thought we needed to wait, precisely because of what I said before. There's a tendency to cry out genocide whenever something terrible is happening. And by early November 2023, over 10,000 people were already killed in Gaza, most of them civilians. So the destruction was already very substantial. It was only in May of 2024 that I became convinced that those statements that were made at the time were not simply made in the heat of the moment, but were in fact indications of real intent, and that what Israel had said were its war goals officially, which was to destroy Hamas and release the hostages, was not the actual war goal of Israel, not then and not now. The actual war goal was to make Gaza uninhabitable for its population, and to the best of Israel's ability to rid Gaza of its population, flatten it entirely, and then see if it's possible to repopulate it with Jews.
And okay, May 2024, so we can continue to orient listeners. That was when Israel issued the order of 1 million Palestinians to leave their shelters in Rafah to a place where there was no shelter. And the destruction of Rafah led you to believe that one could no longer deny genocide was playing out. So that was the red line. Is that right?
Correct. And I should say, I mean, to say that people were sheltering in Rafah is also a bit of an understatement,
Sure.
because most of the people there had been displaced over and over again. The original population of Rafah before the war was about 280,000. So the vast majority of people there had been displaced by the IDF, repeatedly being told to leave wherever they were, their homes, or later on all kind of other places, so-called safe zones, for their own safety. And once they left those places were leveled so that there was nothing to go back to. So in early May, there were about 1 million people there, most of them displaced people, and they were then displaced once more to the beach area, to the Mawasi area, which had no infrastructure whatsoever. And then the IDF moved into Rafah, and by August, it was gone. It was simply leveled.
And there were operators in the Israeli Defense Force who had used genocidal language, and now they were acting on that language. Is that right?
Yes, precisely. And these statements have been made over and over again. It's important to understand that most recently, there was a ceasefire that was imposed on Israel in January of this year, just before President Trump came into office. Israel was reluctant to do it, but there was pressure on it. And in March, Israel unilaterally broke that ceasefire and resumed the fighting. And around that time, in early May, the Israeli Prime Minister spoke clearly about what the intent was. He said, he was quoted as saying, in a Foreign and Security Committee meeting, and I'm quoting him, "We are destroying more and more houses. They have nothing to return to. The only consequence resulting from this will be the desire of Gazans to emigrate out of the Strip. Our main problem is finding states that will take them in."
This is the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. Our guest is Omir Bartov. He's a Jewish Israeli professor who studies the Holocaust and genocide at Brown University. He says genocide is, in fact, happening in Gaza. Professor, this was a hard conclusion for you. You grew up in Israel in a Zionist home. You were a soldier in Israel's Defense Force. What kind of work did you have to do emotionally or socially to allow yourself to come to this conclusion?
Look, I mean, I'll put it this way. First of all, whether I'm Israeli or Jewish or served, which I did for 4 years in the IDF and was a soldier, an officer, and lived the first half of my life in Israel, all of that, of course, matters to me. But just as a human being, to see what is happening in Gaza, and I'm someone who devoted his entire career to studying war crimes, the Holocaust, genocide. So this is not the first time that I'm watching or reading about horrors, but it is just heartbreaking. And then, of course, to think that the State of Israel was established in the same year that the Genocide Convention was passed by the UN in 1948. And both the Genocide Convention and the creation of the State of Israel were legitimized by the international community because of the crimes committed by the Nazis, and most importantly, the Holocaust. For a state that was created in its own mind and in the minds of many people outside of that state as the answer, the Jewish answer to the Holocaust, to be engaged in this kind of destruction of a population on such a level, what I definitely believe can only be defined as a genocidal operation in Gaza, is a scandal.
Professor, I want to think about that a little more deeply, and that is the Holocaust, because I'm guessing there are Jewish people listening to this right now who are probably uncomfortable because of the Holocaust, a genocide of enormous scale committed against Jewish people across Europe. It has me wondering what the reactions have been like from Jewish people to your piece, and if any of it is justified.
Look, there were two kinds of reactions, and I'll say, because you asked me what my emotional response was, and I'm a scholar, and I try to think about things on the basis of facts and with as much reason, and I try to leave as much as I can my emotions out of it. So the reactions that I got, I would say, were divided into mainly two parts. One was many people who wrote me thanking me, and many of them Jewish people, American and Israeli, thanking me for writing this because they felt that it was important to put things in a clear, analytical way and to call things what they were. And they felt that I gave them a little bit of an opening to thinking about this. The other type of response I got was very emotional, not with too many arguments, by Jewish people, I think mostly, who were enraged by the fact that I used that term and, called me all kinds of unpleasant names, but basically implying that I was betraying my own people. I can understand that response, but I think that we must look at things as they are. We must make sure that we are right in calling it what it is, if only because the most important thing right now is to stop the killing. And secondly, because we have to understand that the issue, this so-called conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, which is really Israel occupying millions of Palestinians, cannot be resolved through bombs and destruction, that we have to find some other way out of it. And the Jewish community in America can play a major role in bringing that about. Allowing Israel to go on as it is will create a state that would be a full-blown apartheid state where democracy is already being rapidly eroded, and a state that no Jew around the world will be proud to support.
Professor, I want to stay on that topic of the Jewish community in the U.S. and their reaction and the roles that they can play. The Metro producer, Sam Corey, who worked really hard on this segment, he recently spoke with a local rabbi about when war crossed over into something much grimmer. Here he is speaking with Rabbi Shalom Canar of Congregation B'nai Moshe.
I'm wondering how you know when one line crosses over into the other. How do you know when there's sort of a breaching of that ramification?
I don't. I'm sorry to give you a short answer on that, but I don't. I am not on the battlefield. Mm-hmm. I'm here in a very comfortable office, air-conditioned office in West Bloomfield, and I am not on the battlefield. And so for me to be a Monday morning quarterback is not fair. In the same breath, I will tell you that every single life on earth that is lost is an absolute disaster. Every human was created in the image of God, in the image of holiness, and every human has a spark of the divine in them in one way or another. Does that mean that we should try and prevent killing everybody? That's hard for me to say because we have to defend ourselves. And if that means that, unfortunately, in the process of eliminating terrorists who are purposely, over the last 15 years, planning out how to hide their military bases in the most populated areas to ensure the maximum death count of civilians, I don't know how to win that war. And if you ask from the articles that I've read, it's a virtually impossible war to win because of the situation that was created by the terrorist organization Hamas. The more civilians that died on their end, the better for them because it would look worse against Israel.
Professor Bartov, in the last 30 seconds that we have here, what do you make of that perspective, one that I think many American Jews have?
Look, I mean, what Hamas did was, as I said before, war crime and a crime against humanity. If your response to that is to carry out genocide, then you've lost any moral standing that you would like to have. The way to resolve this conflict is not through bombs. The reason that Hamas became strong in Gaza was that people in Gaza were desperate. They were in a siege for 16 years. Food was controlled in Gaza long before October 7th. There were calorie counts of supplies of food by Israel, food allowed in by Israel. You have to seek a political solution to this. It cannot be resolved by killing the entire population of Gaza.
Thank you. Omir Bartov is a Jewish-Israeli professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Brown University. Thank you so much, Professor. This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. We'll be right back on the Metro.